Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. Interesting news of course in EVE Online this week. First of all, god damn it keeps wanting me skip this version. Recording software keeps popping up. So let's get started with the new filaments. The needle jack filaments should be in game. I think CCP did a last minute change to the needed materials for those, and as a result some people will have been burned making early investments based on what's on CC. Keep in mind whenever anything shows up on CC, and also whenever I make a video on CC, which I do decently often, all of that stuff is definitely still subject to change, and CCP does change stuff from time to time before bringing it to TQ. After that, of course, big news, FanFest 2020 has been cancelled. Very unfortunate, very sad news of course, but I think that it's also the right decision to take because of the coronavirus potentially being a real health hazard, and of course large gatherings like that are always going to come under scrutiny. Even for me personally at my real life work, we're now being requested to always take our laptops home so that in case of inaccessibility of the place where I work, I then have the option to work from home. So it's really starting to go viral, you could say, and well, always be careful out there and try to stay healthy, guys. So let's move on to the New Eden store. If I'm not mistaken, there were a couple of new skins there as well. Yep, here we go. Gila Abyssal Darkfield skin, Exostorm skin. So there's definitely some new Abyssal inspired skins coming out for the Gila yet again. I think still by far the most popular platform for that activity. Anything on sale? Bundles? No, I do know that there's like a 15% plex sale going on at the moment. That should be interesting in the market as well. Intaki Syndicate skins, I do like those. I think they're pretty cool. Dark grayish with a dark blue as well. Those are pretty cool. Look at that on the Ishtar, very nice as well. Vexor looking really nice. Astarte and Brutix Navy issue. God damn, those look good. I do personally, I really like the Galente ships, and those Intaki Syndicate skins always do look pretty good. But no special sales or anything like that to report here. That means that we get to move on to the market, and as always we are going to start with some plex and stuff coming in at 250. Here we go, let's get started with those plex then, and let's start off with the chart. That is still flat, just above 3.25 million. We do have today's daily average that just broke down to less than 3.25 million. So let's see what's happening in the stations. Ingita itself selling for 3.3. I think that's a little bit of pressure from last week as well. Buyers are below 3.2 million, and then in the player owned trade hubs, yep, more competition coming in. We're pretty much below 3.3 million now. We're seeing our first few sell orders, so a bit of pressure. I personally believe that this is due to the extra sale that CCP is holding now, 15% off. You can also see that the volumes have been increasing since yesterday, I think this is. So a bit of pressure here because of a sale. Other than that, of course, my outlook for plex has changed a little bit as well. I still think that on the long term, if you expect inflation in the game, that plex are useful hedges against inflation. They're basically the gold of the real world economy. You can't, bring in a lot of plex without actually providing a lot of income for CCP. That should mean hype and things like that. And of course, ISK can flow just naturally, especially now with alpha accounts. So I still think that they're worthwhile investments, but I would not be that sure that you're gonna get like a medium or even or a short-term return on these at this point, because of course FanFest has been cancelled. CCP did say that they're going to look how they're going to bring us all of the content that they had planned for FanFest, but this is going to definitely change the dynamic here. And a second thing is, of course, is be announced in another dev blog, which I covered, that they are changing the market dynamics yet again, and it does feel like there's going to be a bit of pressure on like very big traders, on very competitive trading there with the smaller ticks that will be limited to like 4 numbers, and then also with well, the change to the margin trades skill, which of course is going to change to something that is going to affect the relisting cost. So all of that, I personally do think, is going to slow down velocity in the market substantially. It does mirror real world trade rules and mechanics quite a little bit, but it will not be without its impact, considering how basically free for all the market has been up to the point where this release is going to hit. It's going to be super interesting in my opinion, and for people like me that are basically too lazy to be very aggressive or very intense on the market, it is going to help us, of course, because I tend to undercut quite severely already, and now I'm basically being forced to a little bit more by this system. So yeah, the value of ISK might actually be going up, and that of course would mean that Plex will not be going up. It's a difficult decision to make. Looking at this chart though, and looking at the current sell price of around 3.3 million, I would say that even historically this is not that bad. We have of course been quite a bit higher, with up to 4.2, 4.3 million just about a year ago, which is of course the FanFist region. Let's see how all of that works out. We're in for interesting times. I really don't want to make any predictions on this one at this point. Let's take a look at the multiple pilot train certificate. This is also a little bit of a surprise to me, now actually going down a little bit on a 5-day moving average to less than 1.63 billion ISK. It's 1.67 billion for the sellers. Yeah, pretty much everywhere. And then the buyers though, these are dropping out of the market, going for 1.5 billion, 1.6 billion in the trade hubs around here, just below that. So definitely a convergence, you could say, very close to 1.6. The average being this low should mean that it's actually people that are impatient and sell straight to those sell orders, probably these sell orders of course, that are currently determining the average prices. So you can grab multiple pilot train certificates for less than 1.6 billion at the moment. After that we have the skill extractors, of course, that mirror Plex very closely, and here to my surprise we're actually seeing a slow uptrend that is continuing on the 5-day moving average away from 380 380 really, and then I'm seeing sellers, let's see, yeah, away from 380. That's very interesting, because of course sellers start at 375 in the player owned trade hubs, 365 for the buyers, and then if we go to JITA, 388 million ISK for a skill extractor, and that means that it's actually the JITA sellers that are currently creating the average price here. So you're definitely successful in selling even in JITA itself at the higher prices compared to the prices in the player owned trade hubs. Very unusual situation here, but pretty damn interesting to see that average this high all of a sudden. Now, after that we have the skill injectors, of course. Let's start with our large skill injectors that are flat, slightly away from the bottom, and definitely above 800 million ISK at this point. 850 million in fact for the sellers, 789 for the buyers though. Bit of a margin opening up here. In the player owned trade hubs we go down to 824. That's a bit of, yeah, practically in between those sellers and those buyers in JITA itself. So quite a bit of competition here to try and make that large skill injector market move from JITA to the player-owned trade hubs. And looking at the 1-year chart, of course, we've been to 1 billion, so this is still decently or relatively low on the 1-year basis. After that we have these small skill injectors that are actually showing some continued pressure at the tail end as well, going down to less than 170 million by quite a bit. Although sellers in JITA are at 172 million, buyers are at 137. You can clearly see that there's a lack of buyers in JITA at this point. 157 for the buyers in the player owned trade hubs, and then if we go for the sellers, so 172 down to 165, and here if you look at the average prices, it's actually the player owned trade hubs that are dominating the small skill injector markets, and that may be finally like a reason or an explanation for the difference in behavior between the large skill injectors that have basically been flat for most of the month and have shown a bit of recovery after that bottom, whereas these small skill injectors you can see here have that same bottom but then have this more wavy and downwards pressure at the tail end that is quite a bit more noticeable. And so here my theory is going to be small skill injectors are actually being dominated in trade by the player owned trade hubs, and large skill injectors probably because of just the sheer value of this item. If you have to move just one of these, you almost become a gank target, especially if you move it in a small ship. That this is still being done in an NPC station in GTA 4.4, and as a result we have this difference in behavior. Very interesting, and I think it could really be the explanation here. So pretty cool stuff actually. After that we still have the daily alpha injectors that were at the bottom due to another sale from CCP. You can see the volume impact right here. We're down to more normal volumes and we're back above 40 million as well on average apparently. Although some sellers are still being pretty aggressive, 37 million here, 40 million here. After that we go up to 41, 42 million pretty quickly. 37 million for the buyers, really narrow margin, of course pushing that price up above 40, which is still a pretty cheap daily alpha injector. But keep in mind, of course, you can see how the volumes are a bit lower, and it is a different market where the item is being created by paying CCP cash, and it is tied only to alpha accounts, not to every player in EVE Online. Finally, we also have the hypercore that drops off to 340 all of a sudden. Is that being, yeah, some aggressive buyers here? 340, 337, all the way down to 332,000 ISK in the player-owned trade hubs. 322 for the buyers, really narrow margin. A bit above 300 is basically the current price of the hypercore. All right, that's pretty cool stuff. And yeah, the cancellation of FanFest, of course, completely changing my personal outlook on all of this. I definitely don't expect a FanFest spike at this point anymore, unless I could still be mistaken on that, of course, unless CCP comes out with like the coolest trailer ever, the coolest ideas ever, creating massive hype for EVE Online. Then it could still happen, but yeah, we'll see how all of that evolves, of course. Let's move on to those minerals coming in at 1155. Like that. First of all, of course, titanium, and you may have seen from the ticker, 1 year high point heading for 8 ISK. I think here we'll have maybe a combination of all of the announced changes and then the changes to moon mining that are coming closer as well, and potentially, of course, the trade changes as well. Perhaps there's quite a bit of relisting happening in the titanium market. I personally am not really sure about that, but if that's the case, then you know, they may decide that we're not going to be able to release that often. A couple of releases and we're already going to do that at a loss. And so with that volatility gone, sellers are going for 8 ISK at this point and buyers are going for 7.4 ISK. 8 ISK, even historically speaking, an extremely good price for titanium. This is definitely going to be an opportunity to sell, and a bit of a surprise one, doing it this double step back to above 7 ISK and now heading for 8 here on the seller side. A bit of competition coming in at 799, but I personally think that we are going to see potentially a couple more billion units coming in all of a sudden, trying to take advantage of this this 1 year high point. But very cool to see, of course. We already know from the ticker that Megasite is doing really well as well, going up 7%. Let's take a look at some of the others. Here is Pyrite that went up to 8 ISK as well, matching titanium. That's been a very long time. Is giving back a little bit of ground, but staying at 7 apparently. It's in fact 744 for the sellers, 713 for the buyers. So there's actually a bit of a jump up here that still has to materialize, or maybe it's like that latest data point. But we're going back up and staying well between the 7 and 8 ISK for now for Pyrite. Very nice 1 year performance, of course, compared to just about a week ago. A doubling of the price in a year. That's not that bad of a return, but keep in mind, of course, one of the worst performing minerals in the years before that bottom finally was reached. After that, we've got Mexalon that also just recovered from a 1 year high point. We actually have a day where we went above 70 ISK, which is really not bad. Let's see if we get a lot below 60. we're at 65 for the sellers and 63 for the buyers. Very, very narrow margin, pretty stable price here, and basically 65 slightly at the higher end of the price we had basically the year before this, and let's say the first 4 months of the year here. Then we had this big slump with the fall activity, and as you guys know, this was my personal expectation on this, or my personal explanation on this, is that due to the nullsec blackout, where you can see the decline in price starting, it basically forced a lot of the nullsec large groups, mining groups, to find a solution, and that solution was in moon mining, and that gave them an opportunity to fix this problem as well. Mexelon being a massive bottleneck in 0.0, focusing on some extra Mexelon sources there made them less reliable on source from HiSec, and thus demand dropped and prices dropped as well from 60 to 40 ISK quite a little bit. And now of course we have CCP announcing the resource changes, the times of shortages that are coming, and the market changes. All of that will, I think, help keep mineral prices in a decent place, relatively speaking, of course. After that, we've got Isogen, and here for the first time we're really seeing a change in trend as well. Isogen, the worst performing mineral in the last couple of years, of course, the biggest casualty of all of the changes that made minerals more and more accessible, available, plentiful in EVE Online. This one was by far the worst. Very available and almost not needed compared to a lot of the other minerals, and as a result was down in price to just a fraction of its original or historical worth, down to less than 15 ISK, 12.5 as a 1-year low point. We're now slowly recovering, 21 ISK now for the sellers, 20 ISK for the buyers. There's definitely quite a bit of demand for this as well, and you can see the volumes here, quite a bit of panic buying, I think, in the weeks after the resource changes were announced. For Noxium, we had a really good chart here as well. Very stable at around 300 ISK. I would say the months before that we managed to defend 350 for quite a long time, and then finally same thing happened, I think, as with Mexelon. August and September you can see the decline at the late stages of the nullsec blackout, and I again think that this was adaptation from nullsec just to the blackout, where they said, alright, since we get a moon mine anyways, in order to be at least a little bit safer for mining activities, we're just going to set up more of these moon mining refineries, and why not add Noxium into the mix so that we can keep our demand low. Of course, here we have that same panic moment where CCP announced that we are going to go for a shortage phase in the resource rebalance phase, went up to 500 ISK on a couple of days, 450 on a 5-day moving average, and now we're back down to 375 pretty much for the sellers, 342 for the buyers. Bit more margin, bit more volatility. Must also be said, of course, that we went to a 1-year high point very quickly for Noxium. I think some people expected Noxium to be like the biggest winner of the potential resource changes from CCP and the shortage phase. After that, we have our former nullsec minerals. Here is Zydrine working its way to 600 ISK. Very impressive performance all of a sudden as well. 600 for the sellers, 546 for the buyers. 1-year high point, so definitely not bad looking back at it that way. Of course, historically speaking, this is coming after having given up quite a bit of value as well by being now mined in HiSec due to moon mining as well. And Megasite is also jumping back up, still not making it to a 1-year high point, but recovering from a low point of almost 300 ISK, back up to 460 for the sellers, 440 for the buyers. Competition, demand for minerals looks to be outstripping supply a little bit at the moment, and my first feeling here, considering all of this volatility on the upside, is that there's either people that are still hoarding lots of minerals, waiting for even better times, waiting for the real crunch, all the full announcements to come out, or they're already through that and people have taken their positions and now we're using more than what we're producing. I'm not really sure about that last thing. I think there's lots of speculation on things getting worse before they get better in the mineral market. We still have to take a look at Morphite, that also went to a 1-year high point of 17,500 ISK, giving back a little bit of those grounds. It's still at 16,000 for the sellers and 15,000 for the buyers. Very, very strong price, even historically speaking, for Morphite, of course. If you still have some of that Morphite that you bought for 7,500 ISK earlier in the year, or any below 10k, you can still make a hefty profit by selling right now. Let's move on to the PI market, coming in at 1925. So someone asked me, why don't I check all of the, what are they called here, processed, I think they are, yeah, refined PI materials actually, and it's just a time thing for me. I want to try to keep ETH under an hour. This is actually a decent amount of work for me, yeah, I'm doing this on Saturday. On my weekends, I could spend 2, 3, even 4 hours probably talking about all the different aspects of the market and things like that. Just for myself, I want to try and keep it below 1 hour. So let's get started here with the broadcast news. Maybe one note on that though. If you have some interesting PI materials that you want me to take a look at for potential reasons, like I think there was speculation on a PI material for the Neil Jack filaments, definitely put those in the comments. I'll either try to cover that in like the extra product, or I might change up the list here in order to cover them. I did it for the cryoprotectant solutions. I'm definitely willing to do that for other interesting materials as well. But let's get started here with the broadcast node. Staying below 2 million ISK, I would say just slightly below average. We're talking 1.95 million for the sellers, 1.63 million for the buyers. That's interesting. That is definitely a sharp drop off. 1.6, let's see if we can 6.3. That's all the way down here for the buyers. Yeah, broadcast nodes being under pressure a little bit, probably from the 5,000 units down here for less than 2 million. All the other competition is driving the price down as well, and buyers are saying, you know, we're fine with broadcast nodes. This is potentially, if you want to take the gamble that at some point there is more structure stuff coming out, then this would definitely be a buy order to place. I would say close to 1.65. That's a really good price if you look at this full 1 year chart. Keep in mind, for the whole year, volatility has been pretty slim, from 2.25 to 1.75 million, mostly really close to the 2 million mark. But so this is a buy price that's well below that point all of a sudden. Competition might be pretty aggressive looking at it from that perspective, but you're also taking a little bit of a gamble on something with structures that usually require advanced PI materials coming out in the announcements, and I'm not sure if that's going to be the case, but we'll see. After that, we have construction blocks that did really well to climb back to an average price, 12,500 ISK, something like that. And basically in the last couple of months was able to, 11,500, excuse me, on the chart here, was able to defend that very well. At the tail end, we are going back to a slightly below average price, 11,300 for the sellers, 10,400 for the buyers. And here again, the problem that is showing up is that we still haven't fully recovered our PI demand. Construction blocks, you can see the number of buy orders here is a little bit low, and as a result it is driving the price back to a less than average range. Consumer electronics, we're still struggling. We're trying to climb out of the hole here. We went to 10,000 ISK. Right now we are at 11,000 for the sellers. First buyer coming in at 10,300, but it's the exact same problem, of course. A lack of demand is keeping a lot of refined PI materials below average on their price ranges. Coolants is struggling to maintain as well. Coolants is a little bit different, 12,000 ISK on average for the year. Actually, historically, I think this is a really good average price for coolants, but this is a PI material that is tied to fuels, and so the dynamic here is a little bit different. So it's a bit of a surprise to see this one drop off. Although, no, if I'm not mistaken, last couple of weeks, more and more of the fuel-related materials were starting to struggle as well. So let's see what's happening on these sellers and buyers. And it's the same thing, 11,400 now for the first seller. Most are coming in at 11,500. But look at that demand here. Sure, there are some buyers in the Tranquility Trade Towers as well, but then 650, and then in Jita almost no one is buying coolants anymore. So that's showing again that lack of demand that is now apparently starting to show up across the board for the refined PI materials. It really depends on your expectations here, but we could start to really look for some 1 year low points or something like that. 10,500 still a little bit high, but if buyers in Jita, for instance, would go below 10k by a substantial margin right here, this could become a worthwhile investment. After that, we have the cryoprotectant solutions. That one will not be doing so badly, of course. A specialized PI material that is needed in the construction of a lot of the new implants as this has been coming out, and is actually breaking out to another 1-year high point all of a sudden. 271,000 for the sellers, 200,000 for the buyers, and in the player on trade hub, a little bit for sale at 235, but this is basically due to the exact reverse, not enough supply for the demand. And of course here we have a clear CCP explanation. It is all of those new implants. Let's take a look at the rest here, because that's going to be interesting. I think enriched uranium also clearly dropping off and going well below average all of a sudden, despite the higher volume, so that should mean some more dumping. 13,400, and look here in JITA at the number of buy orders. We can take a look around us, but the price isn't even going up in the perimeter Tranquility Trade Tower. So here this is again showing a clear lack of demand, despite the fact that here the margin has dropped to 800 discs. That's actually decently reasonable. Sellers, I think, are feeling the pressure. 13,840, 13,792, 13,789, 13,500, 13,400. Quite a bit of heavy undercutting happening here all of a sudden, putting more pressure on the price. Integrity response drones, advanced PI material, very interesting. All of a sudden a breakout, doing the complete opposite of the broadcast nodes, where we know that buyers are really low. This is hopeful, I would say, for people that want to invest in that idea, because this one is breaking out. Started just below 2.5 million, is now selling for 3.3 million almost. Buyers have been forced up to 2.9 million as well. Pretty narrow margin considering how high the price has gone all of a sudden. Not sure what the explanation is, but this is substantial. If you have any of those, and I think I'm holding some of those, let's take a look at that. I'm actually holding broadcast nodes at 175, and I'm holding well, I should check. I think I have some integrity response drones ready. This is definitely an unexpected sell opportunity here. Not even a volume response, so I'm not sure exactly what's happening here. After that, we've got the mechanical parts. You can clearly see on the 1-year chart that we're starting to struggle here as well to maintain a price close to the yearly average. 10,500 for the sellers, 9,600 for the buyers. In the player on trade hubs, we're going up to 9,900. But again, lack of demand clearly showing quite a bit of pressure, and you're buying below 10,000 discs. This is potentially something that you could do, although this is also starting to explain the really low fuel price, of course. Organic mortar applicators going back above a million. It's at 1.1. Buyers have been forced to almost 1.1 as well, next to no margin, but this is just an average price. Again, this looks like quite a bit of volatility. The range is from 950,000 to 1.2 million. This is actually a very, very stable market for the last year. Robotics next, tied to fuels, and the bad news just keeps coming in. Look at that, well below 90,000 disc, now 85,000 for the average price of today so far. 90,500 for the sellers. They're trying to stay above 90k, but pressure is still coming in, and again the lack of demand is pretty obvious with 81,000 disc for the buyers. For the longer term, this is starting to look like a pretty interesting chart as well. Self-harmonizing power core, also known a little bit of little bit of volatility in the last couple of months, and is now getting back to a normal range. I would say 2.2 million for the sellers and 2 million for the first buyer, but again, be careful with volatility. And here we can clearly see that the Tranquility Trade Tower is starting to take quite a bit of activity over as well, with a majority of the buyers here going just above 2 million as well in the Tranquility Trade Tower. Interesting stuff. I do wonder how the changes announced in the dev block are going to affect that dynamic, because of course everyone that has a player owned trade hub will be now forced to have at least a 1% tax added to all of those sales. Mine was at 0.01 at the lowest possible, while still having some numbers come in to keep an eye on activity there. And of course 50% of that will become an ISK faucet, so that goes to NPCs, and the other 50% goes to the owners. So it might help with my own income if there's a lot of trade happening in Digital, but what is it going to do to the Tranquility Trade Tower? Well, it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. Of course, right now, especially for the self-harmonizing power cores, complete domination of the buy orders happening in that trade tower. Of course, they are always doing that with a one jump range, so it's possible that all that trade actually still happens in Cheetah and that it could move back very quickly. They're only buy orders after all. Next up, we have the superconductors, and okay, I'm starting to sell them. Look like it's good time. Completely counter the trend, was also suffering quite a little bit since September here to stay above 10,000 disc. Now we are at 14,500 disc for the sellers, 13,900 for the buyers. Complete trend break for something that I'm producing, and I was actually stockpiling that since last summer, so I still have quite a bit to sell here. Very good opportunity to do so, of course, and I'm going to continue to slowly unload my stuff. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm unloading these in batches of maybe 10k or something like that, so that I can try to move those products very quickly and not completely choke the market on my own volumes. Always something that you have to be careful for, but it looks like we have a very strong superconductor market, so this is definitely the time to sell. Test cultures were struggling last week and are still a little bit under pressure, trying to stay up there above average, but it's not going to be easy. 9,000 for the sellers, 8,100 for the buyers, and again you can see on the buy orders, that's the difference I think with superconductors. Yeah, look at the buyers in Cheetah, and compared to everything else, yeah, all of a sudden more demand right there, but the rest is struggling. And finally we get wetware mainframes that was doing really well, above average since the start of the year. It has to give back that ground finally. 2.2 million for the sellers, 2 million for the buyers, and again a lack of demand. It's really the story in the PI materials right now, yeah, that means that even stuff like the construction blocks that managed to get back are now giving back those grounds and are back below average. So interesting stuff. The one product that's standing out here, superconductors, is one that I've been hoarding for quite a bit and I'm actively producing, so good times for me. I hope that you guys will also have a successful PI materials eventually. I think right now, I have to be honest, it's looking for investments that's going to be the most effective. Let's move on to the advanced moon materials, coming in at 3110. And here, of course, what do I expect? There are some rumblings, but no real massive war announcements or anything like that. I do hear some rumblings around like Legacy, Imperium and stuff like that. So let's take a look here and see if we notice anything that would be war related. I don't expect it. So here crystalline carbonate continuing on the same pattern. Quite a bit of volatility, going from a range of 170 down to 140, back up, back down. Quite a little bit. Right now we're at 160 for the sellers, 153 for the buyers. So we're basically recovering here. Let's see if that volatility continues, but for now we're back on an average price for crystalline carbonate after going from a high point just about a week ago, and a week before that we're actually below average. So a bit of movement there, but on average we're staying around that 160 range. Next up we have the ferrite carbide market that also showed quite a bit of volatility. That is declining over the last couple of months though, and looks like we are settling at or below average. I would say 140 could be close to the average. It's 140 for the sellers, but it's 125 for the buyers. That one is clearly below average, so look out for the pressure here. But for now, the sellers are commanding an average price. After that, we have our titanium carbide market flat at a below average price. I would say below 175 here. 173 for the sellers, 156 for the buyers. In the player on trade ups, I'm gonna have to keep this filter up. It goes up to 172 as well. So here there is clearly enough demand to keep the price in check, but it's pretty damn low. After that, we've got our tungsten carbide that had a little bit of volatility last week, going back above 200. Not to last, of course. That supply finds its way very quickly to these opportunities, and you can see it right here: 205, 199, 198, 187, 186, and here we go, 186.75 as the latest order, and buyers bit more margin here, 168. So that is clearly putting pressure on the price to recover back to a below average range, unfortunately. For our meta materials, we've got photonics very flat on 15k at this point, definitely pretty low as well. Sellers in fact going in below 15,000 disc, buyers at 13,000 disc. That is pretty low as well. Let's see if we can get that to show up on the chart. That's all the way down here. Yeah, another week where if you want an investment, not for the short term, but for the longer term. Photonic metamaterials on the buy side could be a good move. After that, we get the plasmonic metamaterials. Flat around average then, a little bit of pressure at the tail end, but nothing too dramatic. 21,200 for the sellers, 20,000 for the buyers. Decent demand, decent supply. Maybe a bit too much supply, a bit of pressure as we said at the tail end, but this is still a pretty decent price range. After that, we get our non-linear metamaterials. So this one was tied, I think, to tungsten carbide. So here, clearly, we are below average. More pressure at the tail end. That one is not so good, despite the fact that we're commanding 22,000 for the sellers and 20,200 for the buyers. You can see there's a decent margin here. And I'm gonna guess here quite a bit more supply than what we're seeing in the month. Yeah, that one drops off very quickly. 20, 19,600, 19,000, 18. One here, so that one has a little bit less demand, showing more pressure. And then finally we get the terahertz metamaterials that are also struggling, staying well below average. 20,600 for the sellers, 20,400 for the buyers. At least it's found its range, but yeah, it's clearly still trading below average for the 1 year chart. Then we get the other advanced move materials coming in here. Fermionic condensate, a bit of a surprise bump up, 200,000 disc. It's already back down. Yeah, that gets filled. Look, you can see just in like the last 12 hours or so, 96, 94, and there we go, 94,000 for the sellers, 88,000 for the buyers. So that bump is going to be very momentarily, and then we're already going back down. After that, we get the ferrogel climbing away from that bottom, getting back to 45,000 disc. 43 now for the sellers, 41 for the buyers. Of course, if you bought down here for 35,000, you can already start to look into selling if you have to take your profits. So it's going to slow down, I think, the recovery, but it's pretty obvious that we are going to go back to that 45 to 50k trade range, I believe. Or we may stay just a little bit below that, but at least we're recovering. Fullerite's next, staying above 1,000 discs, so that's not bad. 1,049 for the sellers, 975 for the buyers, but clearly this is lacking the volatility to actively trade in my opinion. Hypersynaptic fibers, 1 year low point all of a sudden, pretty interesting. Was declining a bit in January, increased in February, and let's see how much below 10,000 disc the buyers are. Unfortunately 10,500, some competition right here, so it's still too early, I would say, to make a move on hypersynaptic fibers. Nanotransistors continuing to show some volatility, but clearly starting to move between that 5,000 and 6,000 disc price range. 5.9 for the sellers, 5,250 for the buyers. I personally do believe that we're going to continue to see a decline in the tops and an increase in the highs, and we'll probably meet somewhere in the middle. 5,500 or a bit below that is what I'm expecting here. Phenolic composites, after a very strong December, January and first half of February, staying well above average, above 2,000, I don't know, 2,200 disc, I would dare to say, is finally coming back down to a slightly below average price then. 1,900 for the sellers and 1,700 for the buyers. And the good times never last forever, and as a result here we are back to a less than average price. Ceramic fibers showing that pressure as well. Let's see where those buyers are at, because this is starting to look like quite a bit of a volatile downtrend on the daily averages. Sellers are coming in at 382, buyers at 317. Let's see, that's still above 300. It's getting interesting. Maybe it's still a little bit too early. Do we drop off very quickly? No, quite a bit of competition here. So you could say if you can grab some of these ceramic fibers below 320, that could be a good purchase to look into as well. So for this week, for advanced materials, we're of course seeing quite a bit of pressure. I would say that we're actually still relatively stable in Nalsic at the moment. So supplies don't have any real problems. Part of the supply, probably also coming from Isaac, is going to keep things from really spiraling out of control on the upside at this point. So it's a little bit difficult to say we should do a lot of trading, but stuff like the ceramic fibers, stuff like the, what was it here, photonic metamaterials that are clearly at 1 year low points with quite a bit of margin on the buy prices as well, could be interesting to start investing in. Don't put all your eggs in this basket, but I think some of it does make sense. I, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, have bought some of these photonic metamaterials. Yeah, there we go. I bought for 14,999. Buyers are now down to 13,000, so I bought too early. In fact, sellers have gone down below that, but I tried to take advantage of this downturn as well. So it's waiting for, could we get back to 20k? That still would make sense. Or should I diversify, try to buy close to 13,000 as well, try and get my average price down? Decisions to make here, but I am actively looking into just buy opportunities in the advanced moon material market myself as well. Not that I'm very good at it. It's one of the newest, that's all relative of course, one of the newest categories in ETH Talks. I still have to really learn the dynamics of that market, but it's all a learning process of course. Let's move on to the Tech 2 ships coming in at 39.25. Like that, and let's see what we got here. Aries, very interesting, right? Last week we were landing on that 25 million average range. I think buyers were close to 23 million. I said, yeah, I'm not sure, but look at that. Price is going up towards 30 million again. It's 29 million for the sellers, 24 million for the buyers. Volumes don't seem to be that crazy anymore either, so yeah, perhaps we should have bought last week a couple of Arieses for a pretty low price, and maybe we can ride this increased price here. After that, we've got the Basilisk, complete counter move, going to below average price of less than 200 million. Even on the 5-day moving average, 199 million for the sellers, 188 for the buyers. Let's see if we can get 190 here. It's below 190. This does start to look interesting to risk a Basilisk investment, to be honest. The Cerberus, after a little bit of a bump, is already back down. So 2 of these waves I made a trade. The third one unfortunately doesn't materialize that high, gets squashed a little bit too quickly, and as a result we are now at 211 million for the sellers, 200 million for the buyers. Not really the breakout that I was hoping for, but keep one thing in mind, I think it's on the ticker here as well. I bought my Cerberus for 195, so I am ready for whenever we have another breakout to make my third sale in a row on the Cerberus with profits. This is the chart that you love, I think. 280 at the top here, less than 230 at the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4 times very quickly. Then a bit of a down period in the fall again, but look at the volatility coming back. 280, 300 at the top and 200 million at the bottom. That's where you can make quite a bit of profit. Not that I bought here and sold here. It's more like I bought on this downtrend and I sold somewhere around here. But I managed these 2 trades, so that's the difference between Tech 2 ship market and advanced moon materials market. I've been checking this market for so long now that I do see some patterns, and I'm able to make successful trades. And the Cerberus is just really juicy in the last couple of months. Now of course quite a bit of a downtrend, but we're still above on the buy prices what I invested at, so looks good to me. Let's hope that we get a final comeback, maybe like another that's a pattern for the Cerberus very specifically. Any of these PvE activities that CSP comes out with, like the Guardian's Gala and things like that, the Cerberus does tend to become very popular all of a sudden. So that is also something that I look at when I decide on the Cerberus. Next up here we got the Crow, lacking a little bit of volatility. Interceptors, yeah, a little bit less, although the Aries was doing pretty well. This one is a bit too flat for me to try and risk anything on. Let's see where we're at. 28 million for the sellers, above 25 for the buyers. I'm gonna say no on this one, which doesn't show the right volatility, although earlier in the year, of course, 25 million to 35 million, then 27.5 to 35. That was pretty good. Right now, we've been a little bit too stable in the last couple of months. I would say I'd need to see us drop well below 25 million before I say, all right, now I'm definitely going to buy a Crow, because that should come back. Next up here, we've got the Guardian that actually reached 280 million. Again, not that bad in volatility right here, right? 200 to 280. And we're going back down at this point. That's normal. That's after reaching a high point, 232 now for the sellers, 201 for the buyers. That's too early to make a move on again. Do I have any? Ticker. Guardian, no. Trying to sell, no. Trying to buy, still the Manticores, and trades made, Guardian, no. So I bought for 180, sold for 240. That's the latest trade that I made there. All right, the Hawk is landing right back where it was stable for a couple of months. So good news that we have this breakout up to 60 million did create an opportunity, but the buy prices are not that visible to me just yet. 37 million for the sellers, 32 million for the buyers, and the Hawk is also a late addition to the Tick 2 market. I think it was requested because it is very popular in the Abyss, so it's not really, I think, a Gnostic doctrine or anything like that. The volatility is much less predictable than on stuff like logistics cruisers or stealth bombers, but it's going to be interesting, I think, to keep an eye on that, perhaps to gauge the relevance or the interest in the abyssal content itself, the solo dungeon content, which, well, a part of the player base doesn't really like. Same thing with the Heal, actually. Very specialized ships that from time to time do see quite a bit of volatility, potentially, of course, when CCP makes a change to Abyssal Dead Space, for instance. After that, we get the Heretic that was climbing for almost 2 months straight up to 90 million, and you would say, oh, whoa, that was an incredible opportunity. The answer, unfortunately, is no. It was just climbing on a complete lack of supply. There were 0 ships being made and sold because we came from such a bad place. We climbed from 60 million up to 90 million, but the trade volumes, you can see here, less than 25 on average. It's very difficult to actually make those trades happen. I'm still trying to basically buy as low as possible, something that's like below the entire chart. Wasn't going to materialize in the Heretic, of course, and now finally, after reaching 90 million, ISK supply is coming back alive, and very quickly we're back down to 71 million for the sellers and 60 million for the buyers. So the downtrend is already starting. Now here we get the Hound. That's the volatility that I personally like to see. We're coming from 35 million. We're on our way back down. If you can buy substantially below 25 million, that looks like a good spot. It's 29 million for the sellers and 24 million for the buyers. Starts to be interesting. You get a decent amount of competition here, and that's a choice that you have to make, of course. Do I want to try to buy one at just above 24 million at this point, or do I want to wait for this to drop off and, let's say, try to buy at 22 or something like that? And you can't know for sure, of course, what's going to happen right here. This data point is interesting. Somehow a sell at 20 million has happened here as well, so I personally am going to be patient on this one. The Ishtar doing really well to stay in the 230 to 250 range, so here too early to buy, in my opinion. 229 for the sellers, 212 for the buyers. All right, that's definitely quite a bit below the chart. This is the volatility that we love. Unfortunately, this was potentially a real one-off for the Ishtar, because this was due to the change to the Vexor Navy issue that was changed from a drone ship to a PvP ship. As a result, the Ishtar gained quite a bit in popularity, and it just so happened to have been at a 1-year low point. So here with nice volatility, quite a bit of opportunity, but I think we're stabilizing now, and the Ishtar is more of a PvE platform. It is used in Gnostic, don't get me wrong, but I wouldn't call it a first line doctrine either. Of that, we get the Manticore, so that's the one that I'm still trying to buy. So I'm gonna leave my buy order here. You guys know I'm really lazy when it comes to that, so in my trying to buy, I'm still trying to buy Manticore. So 24 million, if that would trigger in those next 3 months, of course I'd be very happy with that. But you can see right now we climbed up to 35 million. If I'd managed to buy them, I could sell them now for 33 million, so I'd have made a profit. Buyers are still at 25 million, so quite a bit of a margin here, I think, potentially. So one of these is, it's probably going to be this one right here, and these 5 is going to be my buy order. We need just a little bit of patience and see how this evolves. But right now, Manticore, yeah, if you grab them, let's say below 25 million, you can sell them at a decent profit. Then we've got the Munin. Also, I think, whoops, is going to be a little bit too stable to really gamble too much on. Was here because of being a main doctrine for the Imperium. I'm not sure if it still is. 237 for the sellers, 212 for the buyers. Very much in line with what we're seeing for the Ishtar as well, right? Heavy assault cruiser, decently stable. I wonder if they'll make a comeback, so we'll keep them on here. I love the Ishtar myself. It's also a PvE ship, and a Munin, it's a Minmatar ship, so we need some of those as well. The Nemesis, that's unfortunate. I was looking for another Nemesis opportunity, right? Stuff that we like is right here. 25 to 35, then go back down to 20 million, go back up to 30 million, back down to to 20 million again, back up quite a little bit. Now that volatility has unfortunately decreased. We're just above 25 million, 26.5 for the sellers, 22.3 for the buyers. Not just ready for me to make my move on again. The Oneros is at 210 then, 218 in fact for the sellers, 191 for the buyers. Again, yeah, the big problem with the Oneros, I say it every week, the volumes just aren't there. You could risk it with like one ship when it's super pronounced, like right here. When you go to 160 on the chart, sure, you can buy an Oneros. You're gonna eventually be able to sell it at 200 plus. But other than an opportunity like that, I'm very, very wary of doing a lot of trades in the Oneros, or trying a lot of trades in the Oneros. Purifier next went to a low point here, recovered up to 40 million ISK, is now again in that in-between zone, I would say. 32 million for the sellers, 29 million for the buyers. That's definitely too narrow margin to say you should be buying or selling these. Then we get the Saber. That was the exact opposite. That was pretty cool to see actually, where the Heretic kept climbing on complete lack of supply. The Saber kept going down on a complete oversupply, went down to 62.5 million on the average price, and right now a bit of a bounce, but supply is decently strong here again. 66 million for the sellers, 60 million for the buyers. I would need to be able to buy like below 60 million before I make a move on a Saber. After that we get the Scimitar, very stable above 200, so here again 211, 195, that's not where I want to be for investments. And then the Zarmas, this is like the one possibility, I would say. 299 now for the sellers, more pressure, 270 for the first buyer, going down to 265 very quickly. But keep in mind, of course, the Triglavians are the new race, the new ships that are like a little bit overpowered at the moment, and of course these have not been introduced into the game that long. As a result, industrially they're probably still being pressured down on better margins as people make more materials and find the best ways to provide themselves with all the materials that they need. So that's one thing. I expect continued pressure just because I think Triglavian industry still has to mature basically. And then the next thing, of course, is what we're experiencing now with the structures. Eventually, when these things are overpowered, to get them into the meta, to make them popular, to have people rush, have a gold rush for these Triglavian ships, they're gonna get nerfed at some point as well. So I'd be very careful with actively looking to trade and take profit into Triglavian stuff at the moment. Alright, let's move on to the Tech 3 market, coming in at 51.10. Here last week, I think we had still a decently healthy destroyer market, but okay. Oh, that was what happened. I think the Confessor broke out, and it's breaking out again. Currently selling for 51 million ISK. Buyers are at 41.2 million. Ticker, Confessor. Damn it, I thought I still had some that I bought, but I'd made my trade. So it's in trades made. Confessor, let's take a look at that. Can I find it? Not here either. Trying to sell. Ooh, that must have triggered then. I'm gonna move that to the trades made as a result. So I did make a Confessor trade, 27.5 million, which I bought on this downtrend here, sold them for 39 million. Looks again like I was a little bit early on that. 51 million for the sellers now, but that's definitely not a bad trade. Of course, what we're looking for is the future. So right now, if you have Confessors pretty cheap, or that you bought them pretty cheaply, a great time to sell, of course. Supply wise, last 24 hours full page, nothing too crazy, 26, 22, 21. So it really does look like the Confessor right now is going to command this premium for a little bit of time until we get flooded with them, of course, trying to take advantage of that really high price. The question is, what are the others doing, of course. Here we've got the Hecate, very stable, just above 40 million ISK, 41 for the sellers, 37 for the buyers. Last 24 hours, not too much, but what's a bit worrying is 129, 45, 26, 32. It's not outlandish, but it's definitely more than the Confessor. So I fully expect basically the Confessor to drop down in supply, the Hecate to drop down in supply, the Confessor to increase in supply, and both of these meeting up. Now I was always looking at like 40 million as the meetup price. It could end up higher, of course, because the Jackdaw had known a spike up to 70 million ISK and is still really very high. It's down to 56 million on more supply, 53 million for the buyers. That's still extremely high, and this is of course what we're expecting to see quite a bit of supply competing, 64, 60 million, 57 million, 56 million. But the numbers aren't that crazy. 217, 34, 40, 28 for a ship that is going, like, I would say almost 50% above its normal price. That's kind of crazy. And now there's a second gap that needs to be filled, the advantage of the Confessor. So I'm fully expecting the Hecate actually to drop down substantially in supply and to go up in price as well. And then finally we've got the Zwepel that is still below 40 million ISK. Let's take a look at that. 38 million for the sellers, 34 million for the buyers. But look at what's happening here. Last 24 hours, 3 sell orders, less than 30 ships. What are you going to produce at this point? It's going to be Confessors, it's going to be Jackdaws, and the Zwepels are still being sold for less than 35 million ISK. If you want to make a gamble on what's potentially happening in the tactical destroyer market, I would say put up a buy order for the Zwepel, and hope that indeed demand stays this high for the Confessor, for the Jackdaw, and that it is going to force the Hecate and then eventually of course the Zwepel as well up. And here you can see nobody's bringing in new Zwepels, so it could happen very quickly all of a sudden. Very interesting stuff. I really love this because it shows the dynamic of a healthy market wherein we're not completely oversupplied, where there's decent demand that can then switch, and then you see that interaction between the ships. Right now we're basically, I expected the Jackdaw to start to really go down substantially and to see the impact already in the Hecate, driving that one back up a little bit. Same with the Zwepel. That is apparently delayed, and instead we get a spike in the Confessor that's just going to make things worse if higher prices are a bad thing for you. So very, very interesting stuff. Unexpected in my book to see a double increase in price for the Confessor going up to above 50 million ISK. Very cool. On the cruiser front, we've got the Legion that is continuing a slow increase, now going to an above average price, I would say. 175 million for the sellers, 145 for the buyers though. Very large margin between these two. That's opening up because of the increased price, basically a lack of supply. Look at the sell orders here, just not enough of that. Everything has probably moved to the Loki that has reached a high one-year high point of almost 300 million ISK, 292 for the sellers, 266 for the buyers. Last 24 hours, this is where production and supply is going. So to some extent, I think the Loki and the Legion are still, correlating. But then we've got a Proteus that's actually still below 150, showing pressure at the tail end. 150 for the sellers, 131 for the buyers. Very cheap, very low, and that on next to no supply. And then we get the Tengu that actually shot up to 180 all of a sudden. 184 for the sellers, 169 for the buyers. And that one actually had decent supply in the last couple of weeks and it's still coming in quite strongly. Here it is a lot more tricky for me to say exactly what's happening. I think it's because of the, unnaturally low volumes on the sellers here that we've got all of this crazy volatility happening. Of course, the Loki being the most supplied at the highest price is, on the one hand, it's normal, but it really feels like these are not in lockstep anymore. The Loki is by far the best, but then the Proteus is just so bad. But is it worth half a Loki? Are 2 Protei really the equivalent of 1 Loki? That's such a crazy situation. That it's very difficult for me to make the same analysis in the cruiser market that I'm making for the destroyer market. Up to you to decide, of course. If you want to fly Tech 3 ship, the Proteus is really cheap. The Loki is the most popular, but is extremely expensive all of a sudden. The Legion is going back up in price. It is definitely something flown in Nullsec actively. And then the Tengu, showing some more volatility, prices in between all of that, and is a great PvE platform. So if I would train for anything or focus on anything, it would be the Tengu in my opinion. Definitely like the second most affordable and a great PvE platform. But of course for PvP things may be different, although Tengu is really nice for PvP as well. You can get a massive tank on that. Missile damage is pretty damn good, so I don't really understand why the Tengu is sometimes lagging behind by this much. But that's the situation, a crazy Tech 3 cruiser market, and in my opinion a very cool and very well working Tech 3 destroyer market. That leads us to the extra product for the week, and I chose the ice products, 58 minutes. I chose the ice products because you may have seen from the ticker, it looks like fuel is bottoming out at around 18,000 ISK, very, very cheap. We know that the PI materials for fuels are under pressure as well, and so I'm kind of curious to see what's happening there. Are we finally seeing a bottom being formed for the isotopes and stuff like that? So we gotta go to manufacturing research, materials, and then we have our ice products. Let's start here with heavy water. Nope, no signs of this stopping. A 1-year chart going from 500 ISK down to 154 is for the sellers, 130 for the buyers, 1-year low point. But yeah, for the whole year you could have said, all right, we could invest at 400, we could invest at 300, we could invest at 200, and every single time you would have been catching a falling knife. Very interesting chart, of course, as a warning to people to not jump the gun too quickly, to never like say, all right, heavy water is at a 1-year high point, less than 200 ISK. I'm gonna put all my ISK in that, and I'm gonna make the investment of a lifetime. And now you'd be looking at another like 25% loss because of where we're at right now. Very dangerous, but this is now a 1-year full trend. This is starting to be a little bit crazy. I may put a little bit of ISK into heavy water at this point. Next up, we've got the helium isotopes, and that's a bit more what I was expecting. A bottom here in January going for 500 ISK, and PI has been struggling, so something had to keep fuel block prices in check. It really looks like it's helium isotopes that went up a little bit above 600 ISK all of a sudden from 500. Currently selling for 630. Buyers are coming in at 571. Now, I bought a long time ago at even worse prices on these isotopes, so I'm still looking at a massive loss. But it's interesting to see this bottom forming here and us moving back up a little bit. Hydrogen isotopes has yet to move back up, but at least the bleeding has been stopped. We went down to 500 ISK and we are now at 557. Buyers are up to 517 as well a little bit, so hopefully this is the start of a trend. Let's get all the isotopes done first maybe. Then we get nitrogen isotopes. That is still yo-yoing around that 500 ISK bottom. Right now we're talking 540 for the sellers, 512 for the buyers, so we're a bit away from that but still struggling. And then finally we get oxygen isotopes, very flat, very low as well at around 550. 575 now for the sellers, but still 497 for the buyers. Yeah, so hopefully the helium isotopes are basically a precursor that are going to help all the others go back up as well, but they're still struggling. So from this perspective, I'm not sure if fuels are actually reaching their bottom. Those could go lower as well. We still have liquid ozone to take a look at. Strong summer at 250, and now we're back to where we started off last year. 187 for the sellers, 164 for the buyers. All right, and then finally we get strontium that also had a very strong October up to almost 5,000 ISK, and now we're back to a 1-year low point. 3,000 for the sellers, 2,700 for the buyers. Should you buy here? Honestly, heavy water, the chart looks crazy good. Strontium looks really nice as well. And then what else did we have? Liquid ozone. Yeah, maybe. For the isotopes, it could be still okay, right? If you do expect helium isotopes to start to show the way, then that could be interesting. Otherwise, of course, we might go back down. Quite a bit of pressure basically in the ice products. Don't go in with all your ISK, but some small buying, I would say heavy water and strontium could be very interesting. But it's a pretty big gamble, and this is actually a category where I have made a few successful trades, but I would say have more misses than I have good trades. So let's, for instance, we know 500, 550 is basically the range for most of these. Don't I have anything in my ticker that is still let's take a look at this. Unfortunately, I removed all of that trade mates for the isotopes. Yeah, you can see here helium isotopes 565, 739, but that's going to be one of these old trades back here, I think. And the rest, yeah, I should have kept a closer eye on all of that. Yeah, I'm just going to be honest. Trading in these ice product things has not been my strong suit. I've had a lot of misses where I caught these falling knives like with the heavy water, where I said, you know, 1 year low point below 300 disc, let's buy that, and then it just keeps going down, going down. I've had the same experience with almost all of these isotopes, and with strontium, I had a very weird situation where I bought a 1 year low point and then had to wait for like 2 years or something like that before I could sell them at a profit. So this is a slow market. This is very difficult market, but with high potential, of course, because this stuff does tend to move from like 2,700 to almost 5,000 discs. That's not bad. Look at the heavy water chart, 500 now. The one, I mean, if we would have a reverse right back, you'd be tripling your money. Helium isotopes, that's a little bit more stable, but if the wave does happen, I mean 500 to 800 disc, that's not so bad. And then the liquid ozone, 175 to almost 300 disc, it's really not that bad, but this is much more of a wavy one, where yeah, catching a falling knife is a real risk. I like it from time to time, and now heavy water does look very juicy, but it also always feels like a little bit of a risk, because I have yeah, made bad decisions in this market before as well. And that is going to be it for this ETH talk, guys. Didn't manage to keep it under an hour, but that's okay. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.